What are the characteristics of criminal law?
Criminal law is general, territorial and prospective in character. Generality means that penal laws and those of public security and safety shall be obligatory upon all who live and sojourn in the Philippine territory. Territoriality means that penal laws of the Philippines have force and effect only within its territory. Prospectivity means that criminal law cannot penalize an act that was not punishable at the time of its commission. Differentiate English rule from French rule. In English rule, crimes committed aboard foreign merchant vessels are triable in that country, unless they merely affect things within the vessel or they refer to the internal management thereof. In the Philippines, we observe the English rule. In French rule, such crimes are not triable in the courts of that country, unless their commission affects the peace and security of the territory or the safety of the state is endangered. What are the penalties that may be served simultaneously? A. Perpetual absolute disqualification. B. Perpetual special disqualification. C. Temporary absolute disqualification. D. Temporary special disqualification. E. Suspension from public office, the right to vote and be voted for, and the right to follow a profession or calling. F. Fine, and any principal penalty with its accessory penalties. What is indeterminate sentence law or SLAW? It is a law which modifies the imposition of penalties under the RPC and special laws. The courts are mandated in imposing a sentence to fix a minimum and a maximum period of penalty. The minimum sentence must be served and thereupon, the convict becomes eligible for parole. When released, he is not actually discharged for the rest of his sentence as served out of prison under the supervision of a parole officer. Does indeterminate sentence law apply to destierro? No. Indeterminate sentence law is expressly granted to those who are sentenced to imprisonment exceeding 1 year. What are the crimes to which ISLAW is not applicable? A. Treason, conspiracy or proposal to commit treason, misprision of treason, rebellion or sedition, espionage or piracy. B. Habitual delinquents. C. Those who have escaped from confinement or evaded sentence. D. Those who violated the terms of conditional pardon. E. Penalty of imprisonment, the maximum term of which does not exceed 1 year. F. Death penalty or life imprisonment, or reclusion perpetual. G. Use of trafficked victim. Application of indeterminate sentence law. How to get maximum and minimum penalty in special law. 1. The maximum penalty should not exceed the maximum provided for by that law. 2. The minimum penalty should not fall below the minimum provided by the law. How to get maximum and minimum penalty in Revised Penal Code. Example. In the crime of homicide, under the Revised Penal Code, the offender is sentenced to reclusion temporal. The maximum penalty under the indeterminate sentence law is reclusion temporal. But reclusion temporal is a divisible penalty consisting of maximum, medium and minimum periods. Which period will we place the maximum term of the indeterminate sentence? Guide for determining the maximum penalty. 1. Determine the entire range of the penalty. 2. Determine if there is mitigating or aggravating circumstance. Which period will the maximum penalty be placed? In pursuant to Art. 64, when there is no mitigating and no aggravating circumstance, it should be placed at the medium period. Thus, the maximum penalty for the example above is reclusion temporal in the medium period. What is the minimum penalty now? In getting the minimum penalty, the rule is to simply get the penalty 1 degree lower from the maximum penalty without taking into account the mitigating and aggravating circumstance. Thus, the penalty 1 degree lower from reclusion temporal, without taking into account any mitigating or aggravating circumstance, is prison mayor. Prison mayor is now the minimum penalty for our example. Important: if your maximum penalty is wrong, it follows that the minimum penalty will also be wrong. Again, prison mayor is a divisible penalty. Which period can it be placed? Under the indeterminate sentence law, it would depend upon the discretion of the court on which period to place it. Thus, the minimum penalty is prison mayor in any of its period. Factors that could affect the imposition of minimum penalty. 1. Age. 2. Conduct during trial. 3. Mental or physical condition. Suppose in the example above, one aggravating circumstance was proven. What is now the maximum penalty? It would still be reclusion temporal, but it shall be placed in the maximum period because of the presence of one aggravating circumstance. How about the minimum penalty? It would still be 1 degree lower from reclusion temporal, which is prison mayor. In which period? It shall be discretionary upon the court. Other examples: 1 mitigating but no aggravating maximum penalty, reclusion temporal in the minimum period minimum penalty, prison mayor in any period. 2 mitigating, no aggravating, privileged mitigating, maximum penalty, prison mayor in the medium period minimum penalty, prison correctional any period. The preceding example is an exception to the rule. If there is a privileged mitigating circumstance, we take it into account first in order to obtain the proper maximum penalty. Then, from that maximum penalty, we obtain the proper minimum penalty by getting the penalty 1 degree lower. Same rule applies as to the period of the minimum penalty. Remember, it will never become a privileged mitigating circumstance if there is an aggravating circumstance present. 8 mitigating and 1 aggravating will never become privileged mitigating circumstance. 3 mitigating, no aggravating maximum penalty, prison mayor in the minimum period minimum penalty, prison correctional any period. In the preceding example, there are 3 mitigating circumstance present and no aggravating circumstance. The first 2 mitigating circumstance shall be a privileged mitigating circumstance. Thus, the penalty will be reduced by 1 degree from reclusion temporal to prison mayor. The third mitigating circumstance shall place the penalty in the minimum period. 4 mitigating, no aggravating maximum penalty, prison correctional in the medium period. 2 privileged circumstance. Thus we lower by 2 degrees minimum penalty, arresto mayor any period. 5 mitigating, no aggravating maximum penalty, prison correctional in the minimum period minimum penalty, arresto mayor any period. At most we can only lower by 2 degrees. Thus, if there are 6 mitigating circumstance and no aggravating, maximum penalty, prison correctional in the minimum period minimum penalty, arresto mayor any period. How is indeterminate sentence law applied in complex crimes? Article 48. A complex crime is punished by the most serious offense and shall be imposed in its maximum period. Example: estafa through falsification of public documents. Under the revised Penal Code, falsification of public documents, Article 171, is a more serious offense punished by prison mayor than estafa, Article 315, punished only by prison correctional. Thus, applying the indeterminate sentence law, the maximum penalty for estafa through falsification of public documents shall be prison mayor in the maximum period. Minimum penalty shall be prison correctional, any period. Suppose there was 1 mitigating circumstance proven. Maximum penalty would still be prison mayor in the maximum period. In pursuant to Article 48, even if there is a mitigating circumstance present, it should still be imposed at the maximum period. How about if there are 2 mitigating circumstance and no aggravating? The rule is, if it is a privileged mitigating circumstance, we lower by the penalty by 1 degree but still place it at the maximum period. Thus, the maximum penalty shall be prison correctional in the maximum period. 4 mitigating, no aggravating maximum penalty, arresto mayor in its maximum period. In case the penalty comes from the result of a plea bargaining, the minimum penalty will be the one lower than that of the downgraded offense. Minimum and maximum penalties are specified in order to prevent unnecessary deprivation of liberty and enhance his economic usefulness. The maximum penalty is necessary for the imposition of accessory penalties, while the minimum penalty is important to allow the prisoner the chance for parole. In short, he is given a chance to redeem himself. Once the minimum term is served, the prisoner becomes eligible for parole if he proves that he has complied with the conditions imposed on him when he was made to serve sentence. Parole doesn't mean a person has fully served sentence, however. It means that he is allowed to serve the remainder of his sentence out of jail but under the supervision of an appointed parole officer. He is required to report to this parole officer on appointed dates for the remainder of the prison term. During parole, the prisoner released on parole must apply himself to a legitimate occupation and prove himself to be a law-abiding citizen. His residence will be fixed and changed from time to time under the discretion of the Board of Indeterminate Sentence Board of Pardons and Parole. The board can issue a final certification of release if the paroled prisoner has proven himself to be a law-abiding citizen. If he violates the terms and conditions of his parole, he can be arrested again. If that happens, he will have to serve the remaining term of his prison sentence behind bars. Who are disqualified to avail the benefits of probation. A. Those sentenced to serve a maximum term of imprisonment of more than 6 years, unless the crime involved is possession or use of dangerous drugs committed by first-time minor offender. B. Those convicted of any crime against national security. C. Note: RA 10707 has amended PD No. 968 by deleting the crime against public order in Section 9 thereof. In sum, under the present law on probation, crimes against public order, such as alarm and scandal and direct assault, are now probationable. D. NB rebellion is a crime against public order and not a crime against national security. But it is not probationable since the penalty prescribed for it is higher than 6 years of imprisonment. E. Those who have been previously convicted by final judgment of an offense punished by imprisonment of more than 6 months and 1 day and/or a fine of more than 1,000 pesos. F. Those who have been once on probation. G. Those who are already serving sentence at the time the substantive provisions of the law became applicable. And H. Those convicted of dangerous drug trafficking or pushing. When should one apply for probation? After conviction and sentencing of a defendant for a probationable penalty and upon application within the period of perfecting an appeal, and if the defendant has perfected the appeal from the judgment of conviction, no application for probation shall be entertained or granted. 9 ways to totally extinguish criminal liability. A. By death of the convict, as to the personal penalties, and as to pecuniary penalties, liability therefore is extinguished only when the death of the offender occurs before final judgment. B. By service of the sentence. C. By amnesty, which completely extinguishes the penalty and all its effects. D. By absolute pardon. E. By prescription of the crime. F. By prescription of the penalty. G. By the marriage of the offended woman in acts of lasciviousness, abduction and seduction as provided in Article 344 of this Code. H. By marriage of the offended party in rape and forgiveness of the husband by the wife in marital rape. I. By discharge of a person under probation. How can criminal liability be partially extinguished? Criminal liability can be partially extinguished. A. By conditional pardon. B. By commutation of the sentence. C. For good conduct allowances which the culprit may earn while he is undergoing preventive imprisonment or serving his sentence.
Thanks for watching. Follow me on my other social media accounts at ms_notabene.
Be sure to subscribe and click on the bell icon to be notified whenever I post. Have you more questions regarding my law school experience or have any recommendations for my next videos? Leave a comment below. See you on the next one.